but it meant I was getting closer and closer to him with every job. So at Renong Berhad, I had no one between me and him, and that was it. I couldn't take it. I didn't enjoy working the environment at all. So I said enough, So I left, and I joined a small Bumiputra group called Shapadu, which was run by one of the earliest Bumiputra entrepreneurs in the country, a chap called Sharani, who just passed away last year. If you think about the earlier Bumiputra entrepreneurs, you would think about Sapura, Samsudin. Sharani was one of them. Sharani was an interesting guy, really a rags to riches story. He worked very hard, but for him it was a question of making that transition from private company to small company to a big company. It's a question of how to let go control and how to empower people. And I think he didn't quite make that transition. So I didn't work that long with him. I worked for about, I think, not even 2 years. Because I felt that whatever I had agreed with him up front, wasn't. I couldn't achieve it because of how he wanted to run the group. But that gave me exposure to the construction, property development, and oil and gas, because it was quite a diversified group in a small way. The businesses were not big, but they had many activities, which was typical of the early entrepreneurs. If you look at any country, in the early stages of a country, the more successful businesses will end up doing everything. Because there's probably not much competition, and the most successful businessmen end up being very close to the people who run countries, and they end up getting a lot of licenses and opportunities. But that's the reality of it. Because if there are not that many people around doing businesses, then So as countries develop, then there'll be more competition, and then people need to specialize. At the beginning it's quite easy to be a jack of all trades and do very well, but as you go on, then you will find that you need to specialize, because being a jack of all trades is not good enough. Then you need to become either an oil and gas person or a construction person. So if you go to developed countries like America or Europe, you will find very few conglomerates. Conglomerates are people who want to do everything. Be like Samdabi, and so you will find people either specialized in pharmaceuticals or auto industry or whatever, because they have to do it because there's so much competition. So Sharani was a classic case of a Bumiputra entrepreneur who'd been relatively successful and had a hand in many industries. So for me that was interesting because it gave me exposure to a lot of other different companies. So from Renong I had mainly exposure in construction, infrastructure, a bit of engineering, property. So Shapadu was fairly similar, and after that I went into merchant banking, because that was in 96. If you recall, 96 was just before the Asian crisis, and CIMB, this is interesting also. CIMB decided to go into banking. Any of you working with CIMB? Guess what happened to CIMB Bank? Doesn't exist anymore. But nothing to do with me though. I worked in the merchant bank, which was what happened was CIMB acquired a group called UMBC. You may have heard of UMBC Bank. So they decided to have a foray into financial industry. Not a wise decision, I think, because they got caught by the crisis. I think CIMB was there for about, maybe, I can't remember, 2-3 years maybe, and they lost a few billion ringgit. The CEO didn't get sacked. Times have changed. Don't print that. So I was in the merchant bank, which was a joint venture with ANZ Bank from Australia, and I always forget the name of the Japanese bank. So there were three parties, who were shareholders in that merchant bank, and unfortunately, CIMB Bank, which was the parent company, got hit by the Asian crisis, and because of that, CIMB decided to get out of banking. I think CIMB Bank got acquired by, is it Maybank or can't remember now. Or Bank Bumi, one of theirs. RHB, right? RHB, yeah, sorry. Yeah, RHB bought CIMB Bank. Quite a lot of things that I went through that doesn't exist anymore. Strange. I hope it's not me. And so after CIMB, okay, of course then, because I decided to leave before the whole bank folded, because it wasn't looking very good, And the worst part about it, I thought, was that CIMB Dhabi themselves decided to pull the plug, which I thought was very odd, because one of the reasons I decided to join them was because I thought this would be a very solid group, with deep pockets, but maybe the Asian crisis was just too severe. So they decided to cut loss, but I decided to cut my loss before they did. Now, I was approached by an old friend who used to work in the Renong group called Dato Hamid. He was managing director of IIAM group at that time, and he told me he had done a deal with Halim Saad to do an MBO, management buyout, right, of a company called Intria and Metacorp. Yeah. Intria was the company that owned the concession for the Penang Bridge. Yeah. And Metacorp was the company that owned the concession, the toll roads for, Jalan Pahang, is it? Jalan Kuching, Jalan Pahang. So those toll gates are no longer gone now because of the concession has expired. So I said, fine, is industry familiar to me? So I said, okay, I'll join you, because he said, I'm doing this MBO. Halim Saad has agreed to sell them to me. I said, great. I quite like the guy. In fact, after Halim Saad, he's probably the guy that I admire the most in terms of being a good manager. 2 days before I joined the group, after I left CIMB Bank group, he told me that his deal with Halim Saad had fallen through. So guess what? I had to report back to Halim Saad. Which was interesting, but not planned. I hadn't planned it that way. Now, because of the Asian crisis, Intria fell into financial distress, because what happened was Intria, along the way, prior to the Asian crisis, had acquired a UK company called Costain. Those of you who lived in the UK probably know Costain. They're a huge construction company, but they were in financial difficulties. And apparently Costain had been for sale around the world for quite some time, until Intria decided to buy it. So Intria bought it and took on quite a big loan in a sterling loan, pound sterling, at a time when the rate was probably 4 ringgit to the pound. So guess what happened during the crisis? The rate shot up to, I think, 8, at one point. So Intria had problems servicing the loan, because instead of paying interest on the loan, at 4 ringgit to the pound, paying at 8 ringgit to the pound. So